You will go bankrupt. The young girl's words froze the billionaire mid-signature. In seconds, a 12-year-old unraveled a $300 million real estate betrayal nobody else saw. Thunder rattled the boardroom windows as the old man's voice cut through the silence. It is my final legacy, Gregory. You know it, and I know it. Across the room, a maid quietly cleaned a marble table. Beside her sat her 12-year-old daughter, small, quiet, invisible, until Arthur Sterling pointed his gold pen straight at her. You reading that zoning file, what do you think? Should I sign this trust? The girl closed her book, looked him in the eye, and said, No, sir. If you do, environmental lawsuits will ensure you go bankrupt. The room froze. That moment changed everything. This is the story of how a maid's daughter saved a billionaire's life work and exposed a toxic $300 million lie. Before we see how she outsmarted the city's elite, tell me what time it is and what city you are watching from right now. Drop a comment below so I can see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy seeing the underdog win, hit that subscribe button. Let's get back to the boardroom. Thunder rattled the heavy glass windows, shattering the stifling atmosphere inside the top-floor office. Gregory let out a short, ugly laugh that echoed against the mahogany walls. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, crossing his arms with a dismissive snort. The chief lawyer looked at the 12-year-old girl as if she were a dirty insect that had crawled onto his pristine desk. He turned his arrogant gaze toward the terrified mother standing frozen near the wastebasket. He demanded Brenda be fired immediately for allowing her child to speak such absolute nonsense during a multi-million-dollar private meeting. Gregory sneered, stating that the help had grown far too comfortable and that security needed to escort both of them out of the building before the police were called for corporate espionage. Brenda trembled violently, dropping her cleaning cloth as her face turned completely ashen. She began to stammer a desperate apology, begging for mercy, while grabbing her daughter's arm to pull her away from the center of the room. However, William held up a single weathered hand. The billionaire did not look at the frightened maid, nor did he look at his chief lawyer. His sharp eyes remained entirely fixed on the young girl. A sudden cold instinct gripped his chest, warning him that the man he trusted for decades might be leading him into a devastating trap. William possessed the survival instincts of a predator who built an empire from nothing, and those instincts were currently screaming at him to listen. He commanded Gregory to shut his mouth with a voice so dangerously low that the lawyer instantly snapped his jaw shut. The billionaire gestured for Ashley to approach his massive desk. The young girl did not hesitate, showing no sign of intimidation. She stepped forward smoothly, slipping out of her mother's desperate grasp, placing her worn backpack onto the polished wood surface. She unzipped it, pulling out a large folded city zoning map, alongside a thick binder of public urban planning records she had studied earlier. She spread the map out right next to the $300 million trust document Gregory had prepared. Ashley pointed her small finger at the specific geographic coordinates of the vast ecological forest William intended to preserve. She spoke with a calm, steady voice, completely devoid of fear. She explained the local government maintained a public database for land use codes, meticulously tracing the boundary lines on her map, showing William the designation colors. She then flipped open the thick legal document Gregory wanted him to sign. She placed the official city map directly over the trust agreement's designated property layout. Brenda stood paralyzed in the corner, feeling her heart hammering violently against her ribs. Watching her daughter challenge the most powerful legal mind in the company felt like a waking nightmare for the simple laborer. She expected them to be thrown into the streets at any second. Yet William leaned in closer, completely engrossed in the child's presentation. Ashley instructed the billionaire to ignore the beautiful promises written on the first 50 pages, instead looking at tiny alphanumeric codes buried deep within the legal jargon. She guided his eyes back and forth between the genuine city planning records and the specific clauses Gregory had drafted. The lawyer's face lost its smug color, turning a sickly pale as he realized what the girl was doing. He tried to interrupt, claiming the child was misinterpreting complex legal statutes, but William raised his hand again, silencing him instantly. Ashley turned to the very back of the massive contract. She bypassed the signatures and the main text, reaching the obscure final appendix section that most executives never bothered to read. She smoothed out the heavy parchment paper and pointed to a tiny faded seal stamped near the bottom margin. William adjusted his glasses and stared intensely at the mark. The billionaire's blood ran cold as the horrifying reality finally set in. Right there, hidden beneath layers of deceptive ecological phrasing, was a newly approved heavy industrial zoning stamp. The land was not designated for a peaceful nursing home or a nature reserve. The seal proved the property had already been legally reclassified to allow for massive chemical waste processing facilities, effectively turning his life's work into a toxic dumping ground. William slammed the heavy document down onto the solid oak desk, his eyes shifting rapidly from profound confusion to a deeply suppressed rage. He pushed his chair aside and gestured toward his private secure computer terminal sitting on the credenza. The billionaire ordered the young girl to take his seat and trace the origin of that specific industrial stamp. Ashley immediately moved to the keyboard, her small fingers flying across the keys with speed. She bypassed the standard search engines, logging straight into the Municipal Land Registry digital archives, using an access method her grandfather had taught her years ago. The 12-year-old navigated through complex layers of bureaucratic data, ignoring the public relations pages and diving directly into the hidden administrative meeting minutes. William stood behind her, watching the glowing screen intently, while Brenda remained frozen in the corner, barely daring to draw a breath. Ashley opened a series of government files, cross-referencing the alphanumeric codes from the physical map with the city council's voting records. She paused for a second before clicking on a specific legislative document dated 2 months prior. The girl pointed at the digital signature, glowing on the monitor, explaining to the billionaire that the zoning modification was not a mistake, but a deliberate action. She revealed that Senator Mitchell Hayes, a local politician and a frequent guest at the company's charity galas, had secretly fast-tracked the heavy industrial approval process during a closed-door session. The billionaire felt a knot twist in his stomach, recognizing the state senator's name instantly as one of his closest political allies. However, the young girl was not finished unearthing the trail of betrayal. She transitioned into another public database, tracking corporate campaign contributions, and matched a massive offshore wire transfer directly to the senator's Political Action Committee. Ashley traced the origin of those funds back to a notorious global chemical manufacturing conglomerate known for its environmental expansion tactics. She calmly explained to the silent room that the chemical corporation had purchased the local politicians and the lawyers to secure the pristine land at a fraction of its value. The girl confidently brought up the final piece of the devastating puzzle, showing a contingent retainer agreement linking the chemical giant's subsidiary directly to the chief lawyer's private wealth management firm. The absolute revelation hung heavy in the stifling air, painting a horrifyingly clear picture of unchecked corporate greed. Gregory had actively orchestrated the entire charitable trust fund concept, not to preserve a beautiful legacy, but to methodically steal it from the inside out. The corrupt lawyer had firmly guaranteed the chemical corporation that the very moment the billionaire officially signed away his controlling rights, the vast ecological forest would be immediately repurposed into a highly profitable, hazardous waste processing facility. The staggering magnitude of the deception meant William was literally minutes away from handing over his beloved land to be systematically poisoned, while his trusted legal advisor secretly pocketed millions in illegal backdoor payouts. The chief lawyer realized instantly that his meticulous multi-million-dollar web of lies had been completely dismantled by a quiet child equipped with a standard laptop. He slowly stood up from his chair, allowing the fake mask of professional concern to melt away completely, revealing a very cold and calculating predator underneath. Gregory straightened his designer silk tie and let out a hollow, bitter sound that held absolutely zero genuine humor. He completely stopped pretending to be the loyal servant and openly mocked the old man's naive, sentimental dream of leaving behind a pure green legacy for the city. The lawyer confidently walked toward the heavy wooden office door, pausing deliberately just before reaching the polished brass handle. He turned back to face the enraged billionaire, delivering a chilling final threat that echoed loudly in the painfully silent room. Gregory viciously sneered, stating that unearthing the ugly truth changed absolutely nothing, because the preliminary binding letters of intent had already been legally executed the previous week. He sharply reminded William that the state-level judiciary was firmly in their deep pockets, and any desperate attempt to breach the preliminary contracts would quickly result in immediate asset freezes and endless draining litigation. The arrogant attorney promised that the local legal system would crush him entirely, leaving no viable escape route whatsoever under Pennsylvania law. He gave the young girl one final venomous glare before confidently striding out into the hallway, letting the heavy mahogany door slam firmly shut behind him. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, leaving the three individuals trapped inside a suffocating dead silence. William collapsed backward into his leather executive chair, feeling the crushing weight of utter defeat settling over his tired shoulders. He stared blankly at the sprawling city skyline, realizing that his vast wealth meant absolutely nothing when the entire local judicial system was thoroughly corrupted. He understood clearly that Gregory and Senator Mitchell Hayes controlled the state courts completely. If he attempted to publicly cancel the trust agreement, the corrupt legal team would immediately file a massive lawsuit claiming a breach of preliminary verbal contracts. They would effortlessly secure an emergency injunction to completely freeze all his corporate assets and personal bank accounts before the morning sun even rose. The billionaire rubbed his temples, feeling a profound sense of helplessness wash over him because he was cornered in his own city with no legal maneuvering room left at the state level. He pictured his life's monumental legacy being systematically shredded into worthless paper by the very attorney he had mentored and trusted implicitly for over 20 years. However, the 12-year-old girl sitting across from him did not share his paralyzing despair. Ashley remained incredibly calm amidst the crushing tension filling the executive office. She reached inside her worn backpack and pulled out a thick red marker. She uncapped the pen and leaned over the massive desk, pressing the bright red tip directly onto the complex zoning map spread before them. She drew one massive, solid red circle, completely encompassing the entire disputed ecological forest area. Brenda gasped softly, fearing her daughter was defacing the billionaire's expensive property documents. But William simply watched the young girl with growing intense curiosity. Ashley looked up from the map, meeting the defeated billionaire's eyes with a remarkably steady gaze that belonged to someone much older. She spoke softly, but with absolute unshakable conviction, explaining a fundamental constitutional concept her late grandfather used to discuss when he worked for the Federal Land Management Bureau. The young girl told William that fighting a rigged battle in a corrupt state court was a guaranteed loss. She advised him to completely abandon the conventional strategy of trying to retain legal ownership through local jurisdictions. Ashley pointed firmly at the large red circle and introduced the principle of federal supremacy, stating that national governmental authority always supersedes local or state-level corrupt legislation. She suggested a seemingly insane but legally brilliant alternative path to save the forest. She told the stunned billionaire that if he could not safely keep the land, he should simply throw it away by giving it to an entity that Gregory and his chemical corporation cronies could never touch or bribe. Ashley detailed how donating the entire property directly to the National Wildlife Preservation Registry under an immediate emergency executive grant would instantly place the land under strict federal protection jurisdiction. The moment the national government accepted the massive charitable donation, any previous state-level zoning changes or pending commercial contracts would be rendered completely null and void instantly. The local politicians and corrupt state judges would possess zero legal authority to challenge a direct national federal land acquisition. The 12-year-old patiently explained that Gregory was expecting a traditional corporate legal battle over contract clauses and signature validities. He was entirely prepared for a standard boardroom fight, but he was completely blind to a total unilateral surrender of ownership to the highest sovereign power in the country. William stared at the red circle drawn on the map as the sheer brilliance of the child's unorthodox strategy slowly illuminated his mind. The paralyzing fog of defeat instantly lifted from his exhausted brain, replaced by a surging electric current of pure adrenaline. He processed the monumental scale of the legal loophole, realizing that the young girl had just handed him the ultimate absolute weapon to completely destroy the corrupt lawyer's meticulously crafted empire of lies. He would not just defeat them, but he would publicly humiliate them by utilizing the supreme law of the land to permanently lock the forest away from their greedy hands forever. The billionaire slowly stood up from his chair, his posture transforming instantly from a broken old man back into the ruthless corporate titan who had conquered the industry decades ago. The deep despair previously haunting his weathered face vanished entirely violently, replaced by the sharp, cold, and predatory calculation of an apex hunter preparing to spring a lethal trap. The grandfather clock struck exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, casting a dim golden light across the highly determined face of the old billionaire. William completely ignored the standard landline sitting on his desk, instead reaching into a locked bottom drawer to pull out a highly encrypted satellite phone. He bypassed his entire internal legal department, knowing perfectly well that Gregory probably monitored every single conventional communication channel within the massive corporate building. The billionaire dialed a highly classified direct number connecting straight to the private residence of the director of the Federal Wildlife Conservation Bureau, located in Washington, D.C. A gruff voice answered the secure line after only 2 rings, demanding to know who was calling at such an ungodly hour. William identified himself immediately, bypassing any polite pleasantries and stating absolutely clearly that he wished to execute an emergency, irrevocable land grant to the national government. The federal director initially scoffed at the ridiculous timing, but William utilized every ounce of his legendary persuasive power, outlining the immense ecological value of the pristine forest. He demanded that a specialized team of nocturnal government lawyers be woken up immediately to draft the most binding emergency charitable donation documents possible under strict federal law. He emphasized that the transfer had to be legally bulletproof before the local state courts opened at 9 o'clock. Brenda sat completely motionless in the far corner of the expansive office, pressing her back against the cool mahogany wall while witnessing an unimaginable display of raw financial power. The simple maid watched in absolute awe as her employer initiated a massive liquidation protocol, calling his offshore private bankers in Europe, where the financial markets were already officially open. She listened as he ruthlessly authorized the immediate sale of valuable stocks, transferring millions of dollars to instantly cover the exorbitant emergency federal transfer taxes required to expedite the administrative process. She realized William was betting his accessible fortune on this single desperate gamble to protect his final legacy, choosing total financial exposure over surrendering his beloved forest to a toxic chemical conglomerate. Meanwhile, Ashley remained seated perfectly still at the heavy wooden desk, drinking a glass of cold water while waiting for the federal administration to process the incredibly complex urgent request. The secure encrypted fax machine resting in the dark corner of the room suddenly hummed to life, nearly 2 hours later, spitting out dozens of thick pages covered in dense, bureaucratic Washington terminology. William snatched the warm papers from the output tray, but instead of reading them himself, he handed the entire stack directly to the 12-year-old girl. He ordered Ashley to review the intricate federal contract with the exact same merciless scrutiny she had applied to the local zoning maps earlier. The young girl nodded silently, retrieving her bright red marker and leaning intensely over the highly complex governmental documentation. She spent the next 2 agonizingly slow hours, meticulously reading every single clause, checking for any hidden loopholes or ambiguous environmental definitions that Gregory might somehow exploit during a future federal court hearing. She painstakingly cross-referenced the newly drafted wildlife protection property boundaries with her original maps, ensuring not a single square inch of the forest was left vulnerable. The billionaire paced the length of the room, drinking bitter black coffee and speaking constantly to the senior Washington officials, adjusting specific legal terminology precisely as the exceptionally sharp child instructed. Ashley caught 3 distinct phrasing errors regarding future land management rights, forcing the federal lawyers to immediately revise and resend those specific pages to ensure absolute sovereign protection. She eventually reached the final page of the extensive document and placed her marker down, nodding firmly to indicate that the federal contract was completely airtight and utterly unbreakable. William quickly signed the final signature lines with his heavy gold pen before scanning the executed documents back through the highly encrypted government server portal. The billionaire and his 2 utterly exhausted guests watched the bright computer monitor in complete silence as the secure digital progress bar slowly filled from left to right. A loud, authoritative confirmation chime finally echoed through the quiet executive office, just as the first pale rays of morning sunlight began to pierce through the heavy glass windows. The computer screen vividly displayed a massive official electronic seal from the United States federal government, verifying the irrevocable property transfer was completely finalized and fully legally binding across the entire country. The ultimate inescapable trap was now fully set and perfectly primed, patiently waiting for the utterly unsuspecting prey to blindly walk right into it. The glass-domed banquet hall of the Caldwell building immediately flooded with blinding camera flashes the second the heavy double doors swung open. Hundreds of invited journalists and local politicians murmured in excited anticipation, eagerly waiting to witness the largest private philanthropic land transfer in the state's entire history. Gregory and Senator Mitchell Hayes sat comfortably at the pristine white head table, smiling victoriously for the endless wave of press photographers. They looked like absolute conquerors, completely confident that their hidden chemical waste dumping scheme was merely minutes away from becoming a terrifying reality. A sudden hush fell over the expansive room as William finally entered the grand hall, walking with a remarkably steady and powerful stride. However, the crowd's respectful silence quickly transformed into bewildered whispers when they noticed the billionaire was not accompanied by his usual elite corporate entourage. Brenda followed closely behind her incredibly wealthy employer, wearing her simple dark blue uniform, keeping her eyes nervously fixed on the polished marble floor. Right beside the terrified maid walked her quiet 12-year-old daughter, carrying a heavy worn backpack instead of a designer purse. Ashley stared straight ahead, her sharp eyes completely unfazed by the overwhelming media presence or the dazzling camera lights illuminating the room. Gregory frowned deeply, feeling a sudden sharp spike of anxiety piercing through his previously arrogant demeanor upon seeing the young girl again. He quickly masked his internal panic with a fake welcoming smile, standing up and gesturing grandly toward the official leather-bound trust documents resting on the table. The chief lawyer picked up an expensive gold pen, holding it out toward the old billionaire with a sickeningly sweet expression of false loyalty. He loudly urged William to sign the preliminary papers right now so they could officially secure his magnificent ecological legacy for future generations to enjoy. The assembled reporters eagerly readied their expensive cameras, waiting to capture the historic signature that would transfer $300 million worth of prime real estate. William stopped right in front of the long table, staring coldly at the offered pen, as if it were a highly venomous snake. He did not reach for the golden writing instrument, nor did he even acknowledge the corrupt lawyer's overly enthusiastic invitation to finalize the tragic deal. Instead, the billionaire completely bypassed the designated signing chair and walked directly over to the main wooden podium standing center stage. He firmly grasped the edges of the microphone stand, leaning forward until a harsh feedback screech momentarily silenced the entire chaotic room. William stared directly into the sea of flashing camera lenses, his voice booming through the massive speakers with absolute unshakable authority. He announced to the thoroughly stunned audience that he was officially and permanently canceling the private ecological trust fund, effective immediately. A massive collective gasp echoed throughout the glass-domed hall as reporters frantically began scribbling in their notebooks, trying to comprehend the sudden shocking reversal. Mitchell Hayes shot up from his chair, his political smile instantly melting into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic, while Gregory aggressively demanded an explanation for the public sabotage. William completely ignored their desperate protests, reaching his hand out toward the 12-year-old girl standing quietly near the edge of the stage. Ashley unzipped her backpack, pulling out the thick stack of government documents they had meticulously secured during the grueling early morning hours. She walked forward and calmly handed the crisp papers to the billionaire without saying a single word. William raised the official federal contract high in the air, displaying the brightly colored national seal to the hundreds of flashing cameras simultaneously. He loudly declared that the pristine forest would never belong to any private local entity because he had already successfully executed an irrevocable emergency land grant directly to the United States Wildlife Conservation Administration. The billionaire tossed the legally binding federal donation papers right onto the table, scattering Gregory's worthless drafted trust documents onto the floor. Gregory stared down at the national government seal, his face turning completely chalk white as all the blood rapidly drained from his head. The corrupt lawyer realized instantly with absolute horrifying clarity that the vast property had just been permanently transformed into untouchable sovereign national land, instantly destroying his highly lucrative chemical dumping scheme forever. The furious corporate investors backing his secret illegal operation would now undoubtedly demand their massive bribes back, leaving him entirely defenseless against a looming massive federal investigation. The chaotic uproar inside the banquet hall instantly transformed into a massive storm of aggressive questions pointed directly at the chief lawyer. Senator Mitchell Hayes scrambled frantically from his velvet seat, attempting a desperate, cowardly escape through the narrow side exit. But dozens of fiercely determined reporters immediately blocked his path, thrusting heavy recording microphones right into his profusely sweating face. Gregory desperately pulled out his expensive cell phone, violently dialing the secret emergency contact number for the massive chemical conglomerate, hoping for immediate, aggressive legal backup. But he only received a remarkably long, hopeless series of dead, disconnected dial tones. The highly corrupt corporate executives had already abandoned him entirely, completely, severing all hidden financial ties the exact second the national government officially assumed absolute sovereign control of the disputed land. This catastrophic public failure directly triggered an immediate sweeping federal investigation, with heavily armed government agents raiding Gregory's private wealth management firm the very next morning to permanently freeze his heavily guarded offshore bank accounts and forcefully seize every single incriminating digital file, ensuring the disgraced attorney would face decades inside a maximum security federal prison. Several incredibly quiet weeks passed since the explosive press conference, completely reshaping the entire corporate landscape and permanently destroying the deeply entrenched corrupt political machine operating within the city. William did not simply hand over a massive, meaningless cash reward to the previously terrified mother and her exceptionally brilliant daughter, knowing perfectly well that temporary unearned money rarely solved deep systemic generational problems. Instead, the incredibly grateful billionaire completely transformed their lives permanently by officially offering Brenda the highly prestigious and exceptionally well-paid position of head operational director for the newly established National Ecological Wildlife Reserve. The formerly invisible Maid happily traded her worn, dusty cleaning uniform for a sharply tailored professional suit, finally earning the deep societal respect she truly deserved, while confidently overseeing the massive environmental conservation project alongside top national scientists. William additionally established a comprehensive, fully funded academic foundation scholarship exclusively dedicated to Ashley, absolutely guaranteeing the exceptionally sharp child unlimited financial access to the absolute finest prestigious environmental law universities located anywhere in the entire country. The old billionaire sat very peacefully in his quiet top-floor executive office, looking incredibly warmly at the young girl who was currently studying a massive advanced legal textbook while resting on his comfortable leather sofa. He finally understood completely that his absolute greatest enduring legacy was not merely the safely preserved towering pine forest, but the incredibly sharp, honest minds he deliberately chose to fiercely protect it. Ashley gently closed her heavy academic book and looked up, meeting the old man's genuinely grateful eyes, with her signature calm, unshakable expression perfectly reflecting the morning sunlight. The 12-year-old girl confidently shared her late grandfather's absolute most important life lesson, explaining clearly that true unyielding power never originates from arrogant, hoarded wealth or highly deceptive corporate titles, but solely from the unwavering, courageous choice to fiercely shine a bright, blinding light directly onto the darkest, hidden truths. She profoundly noted aloud that a simple, honest ledger, combined with unwavering personal integrity, will always eventually completely crush the absolute most expensive, elaborate web of elite lies. Because unchecked, arrogant greed blindly ignores the crucial fine print, while genuine, honest intelligence constantly, tirelessly seeks it out. The entire country ultimately learned a terrifyingly beautiful moral lesson, that unforgettable historic day discovering exactly how an entirely invisible, marginalized child, armed with absolutely nothing but raw, unyielding honesty and a remarkably steady, calculating gaze, completely dismantled the absolute highest, untouchable heights of corrupt elite power, forever proving that the absolute greatest wealth any human being can ever possess remains a purely uncorrupted mind.